personality structure in such a way that the tendency of the recipient to become dependent upon another person is enhanced. A material which will cause mental confusion of such a type that the individual under its influence will find it difficult to maintain a fabrication under questioning. Substances which lower the ambition and general working efficiency of men when administered in undetectable amounts. Substances which promote, substances which will substances which will promote weakness or distortion of the eyesight or hearing faculties, preferably without permanent effects. A knockout pill which can surreptitiously be administered in drinks, food, cigarettes, as an aerosol, etc., which will be safe to use, provide a maximum of amnesia, and be suitable for use by agent types on an ad hoc basis. A material which can be surreptitiously administered by the above routes and which in very small amounts will make it impossible for a person to perform physical activity. MK Delta. The Church Committee report in 1976 described the MK Delta program as follows. A special procedure designated MK Delta was established to govern the use of MKUltra materials abroad. Such materials were used on a number of occasions. Because MKUltra records were destroyed, it is impossible to reconstruct the operational use of MKUltra materials by the CIA overseas. It has been determined that the use of these materials abroad began in 1953 and possibly as early as 1950. Drugs were used primarily as an aid to interrogations by MKUltra/MK Delta. Materials were also used for harassment, discrediting, or disabling purposes. MK Search. In 1964, MK Search was the name given to the continuation of the MKUltra program. The MK Search program was divided into two projects dubbed MK Often/Chickwit. Funding for MK Search commenced in 1965 and ended in 1971. The project was a joint project between the U.S. Army Chemical Corps and the Central Intelligence Agency's Office of Research and Development to find new offensive use agents with a focus on incapacitating agents. The purpose of the project was to develop, test, and evaluate capabilities in the covert use of biological, chemical, and radioactive material systems and techniques for producing predictable human behavioral and/or physiological changes in support of highly sensitive operational requirements. By March 1971, over 26,000 potential agents had been acquired for future screening. The CIA were interested in bird migration patterns for CBW research under MKUltra, where a sub-project 139 designated bird disease studies at Penn State. MK Often. MK Often was to deal with testing and toxicological, transmissivity, and behavioral effects of drugs in animals and ultimately humans. McChitwick was concerned with acquiring information on new drug developments in Europe and the Orient, and with acquiring samples. Experiments. I guess I will go over all this. I'm just going to read the whole Wikipedia article, and then I'll maybe do another. There was another article I wanted to read and go through some documents, and I'll do that on my next video. Yeah, because I mean this is important information. And just look up MKUltra on Wikipedia, or look up any good articles on Google on MKUltra. But I just wanted to go through the information to show how similar, what they are working on in, at the start of 1953 with chemicals and things like that is what they are continuing today with electromagnetic frequencies and radio frequencies, the electromagnetic spectrum, with directed energy weapon systems. Experiments. CIA documents suggest that chemical, biological, and radiological means were investigated for the purpose of mind control as part of MKUltra. An estimated $10 million USD, roughly 87.5 million adjusted for inflation or more, was spent. Drugs. LSD. Early CIA efforts focused on LSD, which later came to dominate many of MKUltra's programs. The CIA wanted to know if they could make Soviet spies defect against their will and whether the Soviets would do the same to the CIA's own operatives. Once Project MKUltra officially got underway in April 1953, experiments included administering LSD to mental patients, prisoners, drug addicts, and prostitutes, people who could not fight back, as one agency officer put it. In one case, LSD was administered to a mental patient. I'm sorry, that line really just kind of hit me when people who could not fight back, who were isolated, or were mental patients or prisoners. It's kind of hit me to my core right there. Okay, I'm going to go on. In one case, LSD was administered to a mental patient in Kentucky for 174 days. LSD was also administered to CIA employees, military personnel, doctors, other governmental agents, and members of the general public in order to study their reactions. LSD and other drugs were usually administered without the subject's knowledge or informed consent, a violation of the Nuremberg Code that the U.S. had agreed to follow after World War II. So LSD and other drugs were usually administered without the subject's knowledge or informed consent, a violation of the Nuremberg Code that the U.S. had agreed to follow after World War II. That is an important, the Nuremberg Code that the U.S. had agreed to follow after World War II. It was a violation without informed consent. I'm just saying that so my attackers who are surveilling me and maybe all the people who are involved in this can really hear that. Without informed consent to experimentation, it is a violation of many, many codes, not just the Nuremberg Code that followed after World War II, but many, many peace accords and codes of conduct that were agreed upon by all countries in the world, not just the United States. The aim of this was to find drugs which would irresistibly bring out deep confessions or wipe a subject's mind clean and program him or her as a robot agent. In Operation Midnight Climax, the CIA set up several brothels in San Francisco, California, to obtain a selection of men who would be too embarrassed to talk about the events. The men were dosed with LSD. The brothels were equipped with one-way mirrors, and the sessions were filmed for later viewing and study. In other experiments where people were given LSD without their knowledge, they were interrogated under bright lights with doctors in the background taking notes. The subjects were told that their trips would be extended indefinitely if they refused to reveal their secrets. The people being interrogated this way were CIA employees, U.S. military personnel, and agents suspected of working for the other side in the Cold War. Long-term debilitation and several deaths reportedly resulted from this. Heroin addicts were bribed into taking LSD with offers of more heroin. The Office of Security used LSD in interrogations, but Dr. Sidney Gottlieb, that's also an important name, the chemist who directed MKUltra, had other ideas. He thought it could be used in covert operations. Since its effects were temporary, he believed it could be given to high-ranking officials and in this way affect the course of important meetings, speeches, etc. Since he realized there was a difference in testing the drug in a laboratory and using it in clandestine operations, he initiated a series of experiments where LSD was given to people in normal settings without warning. At first, everyone in technical services tried it. A typical experiment involved two people in a room where they observed each other for hours and took notes. As the experimentation progressed, a point was reached where outsiders were drugged with no explanation whatsoever, and surprise acid trips became something of an occupational hazard among CIA operatives. Adverse reactions often occurred. For example, an operative who had received the drug in his morning coffee became psychotic and ran across Washington, seeing a monster in every car that passed him. The experiments continued even after Dr. Frank Olson, an Army scientist who had not taken LSD before, went into deep depression after a surprise trip and later fell from the 13th story window. Some subjects' participation was consensual, and in these cases they appeared to be singled out for even more extreme experiments. In one case, 7 volunteers in Kentucky were given LSD for 77 consecutive days. Wow. LSD was eventually dismissed by MKUltra's researchers as too unpredictable in its results. They had given up on the notion that LSD was the secret that was going to unlock the universe. but it still had a place in the cloak and dagger arsenal. However, by 1962, the CIA and the Army had developed a series of super hallucinogens, such as the highly touted BZ, which was thought to hold greater promise as a mind control weapon. This resulted in the withdrawal of support by many academics and private researchers, and LSD research became less of a priority altogether. Other drugs. Another technique investigated was the intravenous administration of a barbiturate into one arm and an amphetamine into the other. The barbiturates were released into the person first, and as soon as the person began to fall asleep, the amphetamines were released. The person would then begin babbling incoherently, and it was sometimes possible to ask questions to get useful answers. Other experiments involved heroin, morphine, temazepam, used under codename MK Search, mescaline, psilocybin, scopolamine, cannabis, alcohol, and sodium pentothal. Hypnosis. Declassified MKUltra documents indicate hypnosis was studied in the early 1950s. Experimental goals included the creation of hypnotically induced anxieties, hypnotically increased ability to learn and recall complex written matter, studying hypnosis and polygraph examinations, hypnotically increasing ability to observe and recall complex arrangements of physical objects, and studying relationship of personality to susceptibility to hypnosis. Experiments were conducted with drug-induced hypnosis and with anterograde and retrograde amnesia while under the influence of such drugs. And this guy is like the most evil man in the world for targeted individuals. Donald Ewan Cameron. That was taken in 1967. He's like really evil person. The experiments were exported to Canada when the CIA recruited Scottish psychiatrist Donald Ewan Cameron, creator of the psychic driving concept. So this is an important concept to attach to what they do with V2K. They use the chatterbox programming to bounce like a conversation or people repeating things or saying things to you with V2K, with voice to skull. They're trying to psychically drive, and condition behavior and affect your anxiety levels, inducing, depression and, drive you crazy, basically. So psychic driving. So creator of the psychic driving concept, which the CIA found particularly interesting. Cameron had been hoping to correct schizophrenia by erasing existing memories and reprogramming the psyche. He commuted from Albany, New York, to Montreal every week to work at the Allen Memorial Institute of McGill University and was paid $69,000 from 1957 to 1964, $603,580 in 2017 to carry out MKUltra experiments there. These research funds were sent to Dr. Cameron by a CIA front organization, the Society for the Investigation of Human Ecology, and as shown in internal CIA documents, Cameron did not know that the money originated from the CIA. In addition to LSD, Cameron also experimented with various paralytic drugs as well as electroconvulsive therapy at 30 to 40 times the normal power. His driving experiments consisted of putting subjects into drug-induced coma for weeks at a time, up to 3 months in one case, while playing tape loops of noise or simple repetitive statements. His experiments were typically carried out on patients who had entered the institute for minor problems such as anxiety disorders and postpartum depression, many of whom suffered permanently from his actions. His treatments resulted in victims' incontinence, amnesia, forgetting how to talk, forgetting their parents, and thinking their interrogators were their parents. His work was inspired and paralleled by the British psychiatrist William Sargent at St. Thomas Hospital, London, and Belmont Hospital, Surrey, who was also involved in the intelligence services and who experimented extensively on his patients without their consent, causing similar long-term damage. In the 1980s, several of Cameron's former patients sued the CIA for damages, which was documented by the Canadian news program The Fifth Estate. Their experiences and